The question in my mind is, how do you create or relaunch a highly profitable and successful 6 to 7 figure business? With so much conflicting advice about the best ways to start and grow your business, how do you get it right the first time? I want to help entrepreneurs make a real difference and navigate the messy world of startup or relaunch. My name is John North, and this is the Startup Secrets for Entrepreneur Show. Join me today when we dig deep with our guests and get you the best blueprint so you can fast track your own business. This episode is sponsored by Evolvepreneur.app, your all-in-one online business system. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at startupsecrets.show right now. So let's get into today's episode. All right. You're listening to the Startup Secret Show for Entrepreneurs, and I'm your host, John North. My mission is to help entrepreneurs make a difference and navigate the messy world of startups and relaunch. My very special guest today is Anthony Taylor, who's the managing partner and founder of a Vancouver-based business called SME Strategy. So welcome, Anthony, to the show.
How you doing, John? Great to be here.
Cool. All right, so let's just dig in your bio a little bit, because it's quite interesting. We've had a bit of a chat before. So you basically... let me see, you got been in the university, let's say you had a restaurant, by the looks of it. You've written 2 books. You've basically been involved in consulting, and I think you said you had a couple of coffee shops and stuff like that. So you've had a pretty wide sort of range of kind of business experience, which is good, I think, because you understand people, right? That's the first thing that comes in business. I think you need to understand people.
Absolutely. Well, one of my jobs before I was full-time in my consulting business was I was a waiter, not a career waiter, but a waiter in fancy restaurants and bars. So I get to see a lot of people, and believe it or not, my job now is centered around people, listening to them, hearing them, trying to figure out where they want to go. So it's fun.
The only problem I think sometimes with people is they don't really know what they want, right? So you're sort of like thinking, I'll ask them what they want, but they don't actually know what they want.
Well, that's why I'm in business. I help people figure out where they want to go and how to get there. So it's a good gig.
Yeah, sounds good. All right, so I'm going to ask you some questions, and we'll see how we go with your answers. Now, I just want to switch this out too. Okay, cool. All right, so how did you get started in being an entrepreneur? So I think in some respects, I don't know whether entrepreneurs are born, but I certainly assume they formed, right? And most of the time I talk to an entrepreneur, they usually got it in by accident. Like they basically, suddenly they were doing like you probably started as a waiter, and when you're a waiter, you never thought you were going to be an entrepreneur, right?
Well, my first foray into entrepreneurship was selling like Kool-Aid at a bus stop next to my house.
Right.
So when people would get off at the bus, then I would sell Kool-Aid. And then I upgraded to there was a golf course close to one of my friend's house. And by the 15th hole, there was like a fence. And so like just on one side of the fence was the 15th hole. On the other side of the fence, my friend and I were pouring pop by the glass for like 50 cents. And so not that we were like sort of struggling by any means, but I just appreciated just, being able to buy my own stuff. I had a newspaper route at 9. My first job was at 14. I had 2 jobs by 16. And then I just knew I wanted to do my own thing. So that's sort of what got me started on the journey.
It's pretty cool. I mean, I wrote one of my books. I wrote about the fact that I used to sell chook eggs, like chicken eggs, when I was a kid. So I had because my mother owned a post office, like a back in the day it was like an unofficial post office. So we actually we had the party line where people could dial in and actually connect them and all sorts of things when you push the buttons, all sort of stuff. I was pretty young then, so I'm not that old. But you know what I mean. So basically, I used to sell the chicken eggs over the counter to all the people that came in, and then at one point, my mum said, "Oh no, you can't be selling these eggs and not putting any money into the feed and everything for the chickens." It's like, so I shut the business down because I wanted to make 100% profit. I wasn't about paying any of it out. So.
Just cut into your margins. That's
cut into my margin, right? So it's like, and I think I think that's the thing. I think there's a sort of a natural talent to it. So in terms of what you've done, so you basically, what did you move from? You said you had some coffee shops and stuff. What was your first step after sort of the waitership as such? Like obviously coffee shops you had some ideas, I suppose, from being a waiter.
So in order of operations was I was a bartender. Then I put on rock concerts for like 7 years. And then I stopped doing that after my main client basically got as big as they could get. I had an ESL school that I bought into. The ESL school closed after 2007, like the economic crash wasn't great
Yep.
for travel.
Screwed everybody up.
Yeah, wasn't ideal. And then coffee shops to sort of keep the business going. It was sort of bad money after good, which was not the best idea.
Good learning lesson
We
for
had
entrepreneurs, isn't it? Like how much do you throw something out before it actually doesn't?
Absolutely. And then 2010, we had the Olympics in Vancouver. So in 2009, I started a nightlife directory that was half in Japanese and half in English called Happening, which is a pun for any half Japanese people. And then I turned that into a website called To Do Vancouver. And then I had a wine directory because I like drinking wine, and I just made like a directory. But then directory websites were dead by like 2014. So
yeah, they didn't last that long, did they? Because the big guys beat everybody out. Then at that point, they realized there was a chance that could have an impact.
Yeah, Google kind of kicked everybody's ass.
Yeah,
but here we are. And then now SME strategy consulting started off me kind of doing consulting and business plans for people, and then evolved into like corporate strategy facilitation.
Gotcha. It was actually interesting. I had someone message me on LinkedIn the other day and says, "Oh, how's the pandemic treating you?" And I said, "This isn't my first rodeo." Like, you know what I mean? Like, as an entrepreneur, I don't think you get unscathed through things. So, like in Australia, there was around about the 1990s, 2000, there was a whole bunch of, and I think I was one of them, entrepreneurs that got completely wiped out between, the Olympics was here. I think post-Olympics is always bad for a city. I think they always suffer badly from it. Financially, Sydney really suffered, and so a lot of these guys got screwed up in that period. So I think at the end of the day, you've got to be careful that you're ready for that sort of thing, right? You can't expect a business to run smoothly and nothing ever go wrong, because that's not going to be the case.
Yeah, I don't think anybody expected a global pandemic at this point, but yes, you got to prepare for everything, and I think it'll be interesting seeing everybody that comes out of this. In 10 years, the next blip, the people that are like, that were COVID ready, like everybody will have a better contingency plan, or should
have one in the first place. Yeah. And I think most people, like, it's interesting. I think when you look at small business and they sort of have these newspaper reports where everywhere these small businesses are being wiped out and stuff like that. But I think underpinning that is the resilience of small business and the fact that they would have worked their way out of that. They would have found a way to survive if they could. And
for sure.
And I think that's the real story about the fact that no matter what happens, they'll figure out a way. But I think if you're in the restaurant business or something like that, so that sort of full on retail business, you would have had really struggled to stay in business when you can't actually see anybody.
I found through COVID about half the businesses did even better and half did worse.
Yeah. And I think, I guess that, as you say, it's a good sort of training school in having a plan. So when you talk about strategy, and I think I'm sort of big on strategy because I think most people don't spend enough time thinking about it. It's the same principle, like when you talked about your books, actually, is that when we do book publishing, we spend a lot of time on title. And I think that strategy around that title, people spend very little time. They'll come up with the first title of the book they think of, and that's the end of it, right? And I think that's, to a degree, business can be the same thing, right? They sort of come up with a good idea, fall in love with it, and then somehow make the strategy fit the idea that they had, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a little bit in a era like a book, it's less easy to pivot to make like smaller changes. I find the biggest thing, especially since it's the Startup Secret Show for entrepreneurs, product market fit being that first thing. And so you can like go iteratively. On Thursday, and when you play this, it'll be past, I'm putting on a diversity and inclusion summit. Mm-hmm. I've never done it before. My business isn't really events. And then I'm like, oh shit, like maybe I didn't do this right. Like maybe I should have had a different title for the event. Maybe I should have priced it differently. Maybe I should have, but I got all the promotion. I'm getting tons of promotion, less tickets than I want. And it's just interesting how like in certain businesses, you don't have the opportunity to make those micro adjustments. I think entrepreneurship is really like the good ones micro adjust quickly. And with a book, it's very hard to change the title because, well, once it's out there, but I've had multiple graphics and say, hey, which title do you like best? And some people were like, nope, I don't like that one. And I said, all right, new title then.
And I think that's the thing. Exactly. I actually did a summit a few years ago and it killed me. Basically, because I think what happens is you don't realize how much work's in it. It's like you kept thinking, particularly you've got business partners who kind of like get them to do stuff as well. So I think, and I spoke to someone the other day, we're about to start a new marketing campaign for someone, and I said, we're basically looking to fail here. I really want to go and sort of approach a market and see what people say no to and why they say no. Because I think if you go on the concept like, I'm just going to play with this, and obviously with the summit, you've never done one before, so you're going to look back and think, oh gee, I could have done this better. But the reality is you'll do the best you can with what you've got. And and so I think at the end of the day, like, I'm looking at that thinking, well, let's plan to fail here so that we can basically learn from it, not go in and have this optimistic kind of approach to it, thinking we're going to get all these customers. Let's learn what they don't like, and then repitch it. And I think that's the thing with small businesses. They tend to not think they're going to get it right the first time, and they don't have to muck with it. But
no, I think, and in this case, because I've done a lot of stuff, I've failed I won't say more than anybody, but I've failed a lot more times than I've succeeded. In this case, what I think I take solace in, and I'm like, kind of like, it's going to be awesome. I'm excited for it. Don't get me wrong. I'm not like I'm disappointed by the outcome. Yeah. What I'm not disappointed about was the effort. And I think as an entrepreneur, the thing that really, if I get down, it's because I underperformed to what I knew I could do. But in this case, I gave it 100%, day in, day out, like everything. I made the plan, I worked the plan, and I got the results. And there's nothing I can do about it. Like, I'm going to get what I'm going to get. And it's going to be fucking awesome. Pardon my language. I don't know if I'm allowed to swear.
Doesn't kind of Apple doesn't mind.
You get edit that one, yeah.
But I think that's right. And I think the thing too here is that, you really can't expect to know what's going to happen anyway in that situation. And I think writing a book, doing a summit, doing those things where you've got a deadline, and it's amazing what you get done on a deadline. If you said, other people say, look, you got 10, you got 5 years to put this summit on, you can imagine that most of the work will get done in the last 2 months, right? And I think in the summit's like an immovable date. You've got to get it done. It's amazing how much work you can get when you put yourself under pressure, I think. And
well, I was telling you about my construction and moving. And I said, hey, I'm booking the movers to get in. The last 6 days, we've done more work than we have in the past 6 months. So I love setting myself those deadlines for whatever it is. So, when we talk about planning, instead of doing a 3-year plan or a 1-year plan, like try to do a 1-month plan or a 1-week plan, because then you'll say, okay, I just need to get like this thing off the line. And if I do that, that'll be the win. But a lot of smaller steps is better than the big step that you might never take.
Yeah, and I think that's the biggest problem is if you sit there and say, okay, well, I'm going to get something achieved. And I think Tony Robbins it's the best way he's ever said it. People overestimate what they can get done in a day, but underestimate what they can get done in 10 years, right? And I think that's the danger is that, day by day, if you're not getting towards it, and the nice thing about having a deadline is you've got to get there. You've got no choice unless it doesn't show up. So what's the best piece of advice you've probably ever given in terms of let's say, strategy and what you're doing now?
Best piece I've ever given. My goodness. Yeah. I've given a wealth of good advice.
Probably didn't take it, did they? Sometimes you think free advice is worth every cent sometimes.
That's why I charge a good amount. What would I say? I think the biggest thing that I would tell people, love what you do. I think that's critical, because if you don't love what you do, the work is going to be a lot harder, whether that means your career or whether that means a job or whether that means a volunteer thing or whether that means like try to love what you do and recognize it's a choice. But ultimately, when we talk strategy is about get really clear about where you're going. If you don't know where you're going, how are you ever going to get there? So, for the young entrepreneurs here, like where do you want to be in 5-10 years? I'm in the middle of a 20-year strategic plan. That's where my head is at. I said, I'm going to go to school. I'm going to be a bartender because I like being bartenders. And then I said, okay, then I'm going to have a consulting business because you can get paid good money there. But when I started my business, I said 20-year plan. So I'm not fussed because things aren't happening tomorrow or the next day because it takes 20 years. I'll come back on the show in 10 years and you can say, Anthony, how's your plan going? And I'll tell you if it worked out or not. But be clear about where you want to go, I think is the number one. And how you like what it means to get there. Everything else, the how will fall into place as long as you're clear about where you're going and what it means to succeed there.
Yeah, and I think that I used to say to a lot of business people, so if you don't have a plan, then who's got the plan, and have they even included you in that plan, right? And so if you don't have a plan, then often you're stuck with someone else's plan, and I think that happens particularly in as an employee-based scenario where people work for years and they think the owner's got a plan for them, but they don't. And so I think at the end of the day you've got to be careful, and I think as you get older too, you realise that time is important. but more important is the maximization of what happens in that time than anything.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, what's an ideal client for you? Like when you're looking, and I guess we're talking about this whole scenario. What's your best customer? You said you do mostly do corporate work now. Or is it?
Yeah, so SME strategy stands for small to medium enterprise. If you guys want to check us out, SMEstrategy.net. But basically a CEO of a business that is like 10 to 100 million in revenue, which I recognize is a large range, but typically there's kind of inflection points like 10 to 20, 20 to 50, 50 to 100. And they are entrepreneurial. They are people driven. They want to create like a legacy. They want to grow their business. They're coachable, and they see strategy as optimal. And so that's the ideal kind of company. But they entrepreneurial and care about people are the two most important characteristics for the clients that we succeed the best with. As in, there are people who aren't entrepreneurial and aren't people focused that we still do great work, but they're not the ideal client. We also work with not-for-profit, mission-based organizations. We did the strategic plan for the Central Bank of Fiji. So not exactly a small to medium enterprise, but that's who we help do with their plan.
And it's cultural there too, because we used to in a previous license we used to sell accounting software. I sent one of my staff members to Fiji, and it's Fiji time they call it. And basically things don't move fast, right? And it's like, whoa, yeah.
Culturally, I mean, I'm a pretty, as a facilitator who leads meetings, I'm like, okay, try to get everything down as tight as possible. But shout out RBF. I hope you guys are awesome. But yes, no, it was an amazing experience. The people there were incredible. But yes, there's diverse people that we work with all over the world, and they all fundamentally have the same challenge, which is no different than an entrepreneur's challenge. Exactly. They just have it at a different scale.
Yeah. Well, I think entrepreneur's just a matter of zeros, right? Depending on the size of business, it's just zero. So it's like the same problem. Just with zeros on the end of the problem. Yep. I like to probably think I should check out what the heart disease rate's like in Fiji, because I reckon if stress is a motivator for heart disease, I reckon those guys have got it nailed, because they never get stressed.
Oh yeah, I mean, why would you? It's beautiful out there. But yes, if you're on, and that's probably it. It's another interesting lesson that my COO talks to me about, and he says that your deadlines are self-imposed. For the most part, with the exception of the stuff that you say, hey, you're going to deliver to a client, which you kind of self-impose anyway. Everything else is self-imposed. So why beat yourself up over it? Like you're in control. So you can set those deadlines for yourself. But I stress, the person who stresses me out the most is me, because I try to hold myself at a high level. And if I don't do something, then I beat myself up, which is not always great.
And I think that I always used to say, like, and I don't know if this might be from Tony Robbins, I don't know, but I used to say, like, whatever you say to yourself when you're alone is the worst dangerous things. Right? And so that self-talk is really can destroy yourself. Yeah, it's that whole thinking thing.
I saw anxiety is a conspiracy theory about yourself.
Yeah, true. And what other people think about is none of your business anyway, right?
Their lives are so screwed up that they don't even worry about you. That's a lesson that I tried to take in early, is that you worry what people are judging. Their lives are so messed up that 2 seconds later they forgot about you. But you're the one who's going to mess yourself up more than anybody else. So forget, and that's the nice word of saying everybody else, and just focus on yourself.
Do you want simple and effective ways to get started that don't cost a fortune in time and money? Discover the best steps for each strategy we teach and the most important areas to focus on, and even to connect with your best customers and grow an online community. Grab your free copy of Startup Secrets for Entrepreneurs at startupsecrets.show. Yeah, and I think that's true, because I think that's the biggest problem is people kind of overthink what they're thinking, because what they're thinking is they're thinking about how you think about them while you're thinking about it's like that's a very, when you actually dig into it, it's like psychology.
Oh, it's sick. Yeah, absolutely.
So what's the future hold for you now? Like, obviously coming, a lot of the businesses coming out of this whole financial crisis, pandemic, all those sorts of things. Where do you see the future in consulting? Because I think it's a massively growth industry, and I think a lot of these people that were, and they talk about the Great Resignation in the US and stuff like that, and I think it's also I can see it happening here, is that you've got a lot of people, shifting into probably entrepreneurship because they don't really have a choice, because they might have had lost their jobs through the pandemic. So then they found out that they actually prefer to stay where they are. My wife quit her job and went into a full-time sort of entrepreneurship job because it was, it's a great opportunity to do it. So where do you think that's moving in terms of the consulting businesses?
The Great Resignation, I think, is going to be very interesting. I think that there's going to be interesting isn't really a word that says anything, but I'll explain more about it. Great Resignation, I'm not sure what's going to happen. Companies are still recovering, in my opinion, from COVID related activities. The people who are creating their own jobs, I think some of them are going to be very, very successful because the tools are out there for that to happen. I'm interested to see what happens economically, like economic trends, like as interest rates and the stuff, volatility, and people start paying back that COVID stuff. I think the economy is going to tighten up, which is going to put more pressure on businesses. And then I think everything is going to stabilize. In terms of consulting, I think we're going to be as busy as ever, mainly because the dynamic work environment of how we work in person and how we work virtually, and how is the new level of performance going to change. Teams are going to need to get rallied around that. And I think consumers are going to be very different in 2 or 3 years. Not that they're going to be different, but their needs are going to be different, and teams are going to need to rally around and adapt on that. I don't know what's the next thing. I don't really care, but there's going to be something, and it's going to change. It's not going to change the game, but people are going to have to react to it, if that makes sense.
And I think it's, in some respects, the next probably couple of years as an entrepreneur's playfield, because at the end of the day, you've got this kind of, a lot of things have been reset, a lot of ideas have changed. And what I've noticed is some people in businesses, and some businesses are open to stuff they never were open to before. Like I look at like Qantas, which is a airline industry, really badly affected by this. And, they've also become almost an affiliate. Right, because they realise with this massive database, so they're selling insurance and medical insurance and all these other services to survive, get through. And when they realise they're leveraging their database, and whilst they used to do a little bit before, their entire focus shifted to that because there was any way they could make any money. And so now they're open to those partnerships they probably weren't open to before. So I think in some cases these corporates are more open to stuff than they were ever before. So for a small business to kind of leverage that, I think that's an interesting world.
Yeah, I think they've said, or it is true, I believe. I think the Mandarin word for crisis is the same as opportunity. And that, like, as you go and when your back is against the wall, like, you will try anything. And so there's all of those opportunities there. And then the disruption in the market, and then this, what's it called? Not centralization, but businesses buying other businesses, that's going to happen. But around the entrepreneur world, the barrier to entry is so low. Like, you have people on YouTube and TikTok, the course world has always been there, but people selling stuff on YouTube, TikTok, OnlyFans, there's a whole whack of wealth being created. I just don't know where all the money's coming from. But that's
you got to wonder, right? Like New South Wales opened back up again just like a week ago, and within a week the shopping centre's full and people are spending money. And you think, where's this money coming from? Didn't they all lose their job? And
well, they want to spend money. Like, they haven't been able to spend money for 7 months, and it's like, well, where did people put that money? But yeah, I'm with you.
Yeah, and so they actually want, yeah, exactly. So there's a pent-up demand to sort of have that money spent, and I think that's the challenge, is that perception is not necessarily reality. So yeah. So in terms, let's talk a little bit about your books that you wrote, because we didn't really get into them. So what were they called again? Like you did tell me before, but
So one is called "I Wish I Knew." Entrepreneurships I made the hard way, or entrepreneurship mistakes I learned the hard way, so you don't have to. Longest byline ever.
That's one of my. I got a long book title like that I could never remember. So that's good work to have a stuff.
Well, that's what the first one is supposed to be. So alignment, which is the left brain, creative, and then the subtitle is the right brain. It's very specific. Oh no, what did I say? I wish I knew. Oh yeah, I wish I knew is my first book. The second one is called Alignment, how to get your people, strategy, and culture on the same page. So first one is on entrepreneurships, all the things I messed up. The second one is on strategic planning and the process we follow to align teams and get people on the same page.
And I think that's an interesting thought I sort of thought about before was that I think the biggest problems in business right now is that in the fact that this great resignation really signifies the fact that the business owner hasn't been looking after their staff and what they want. And to a degree, they haven't really focused on, they're focused on the money, particularly when this COVID stuff, you know, they would have been focused on trying to get the revenues in the door, and staff took the back step. And so if they're not aligning their staff and leading their staff and giving them some sort of future, then they're going to lose them, and they're hard to replace.
I'd say it exacerbated what was already there.
Mm.
If you were an employer that prioritized your employees and you set up a good system and they stayed because you work together, you
Yep.
are going to be in a greater position. But if you were not, and you were sort of a commodity job and you treated people like shit and you lost your employees, well, that was coming. It
It just
just
made it bigger, right? It
catalyzed.
just highlighted something that was already there, but just made it much, much bigger.
Exactly. And so now if you think of like the supply demand kind of thing, the supply for jobs, well, I guess it depends. The demand for jobs is much higher than the supply. So the buying power is with the employee. The
Mm.
employer is, in trouble. And what's going to happen is employees are going to get more expensive, goods are going to get more expensive, and they're going to keep doing this dance for the next little bit. And it'll be interesting to see how it levels out. Something's got to give somewhere. I don't know where or when it's going to give.
And I think automation's the interesting part of this, because I think what's happened now is that you've got a lot of problems in terms of employment. Because I was watching a sort of bit of a TED talk the other day talking about, and it's something that's happening a lot, is the population itself is decreasing in new babies being born and stuff like that. So the older population, like say from our range, in 10, 20, 30 years time, we won't be working, and there won't be anywhere near as many people working in this in that situation. So they're going to have to ultimately have to automate. And I think that the challenge then is once a business is automated, then there's no way back from that. Like the car industry is a good example of that. Amazon's probably a good example of that too, where they're automating as much as possible. And so I think that's a danger for a lot of people, is that they don't build in automation if they don't think that their business is sort of like going to last forever, when the reality is automation could replace them tomorrow. That's a big risk and an opportunity in some respects as well. Obviously, as a business owner, if you can automate stuff, you can
Oh, yeah.
save money.
I believe you should be, well, in some senses, automate as much as you can from a process standpoint. On another standpoint, like low value jobs are going to get, like a burger flipper. Why
Mm.
not have a robot do that? And then the challenge for young people is, are you building skills to be successful in the future economy, not just today's economy?
Mm.
Um, yes. And then, I have no idea what's going to happen in 20 years. If you give me more time, I'd be able to think it out.
I think it out, yeah. And I think, yeah, I think most of the time it's obvious though when you're looking around. Like when you start looking around at businesses and you realise what they're doing, I think it's obvious where it's going. And then the biggest down problem is if you don't have that skill set, you're gonna have trouble getting another job, because you have to almost retrain. Again, I was reading this book about it. Said that they reckon that in the next 50 years that people will have to completely retrain every 10 years for a completely different job. So they
Mm.
might move from being a car mechanic to a drone engineer or something like
Yeah.
that, because they're going to have to go completely to another job and they have to reskill and start all over again. And
Yeah.
I think the really nice thing about entrepreneurship is that you get to set your own playing field. You can do whatever you like, change it. If your business wants to take a whole new direction, that's no problem. It's what happens inside your own business. You can just change it. I think that's where
As long as you're willing to change it, because some
yes.
people are, and then the automation thing is, again, a tool that human beings will leverage. Hopefully robots won't fully outsource human beings in
Mm,
our lifetime. But yes, the retraining thing, I mean, there's a lot of people who are like, hey, like older people, if you're not internet savvy, if you're not Zoom savvy,
mm,
unfortunately it's a tough world. And I try to be empathetic to people who are in a position where they need to be retrained, or they don't have those skills
mm.
that for somebody in my generation who grew up with and without the internet, that
Yeah.
like it came naturally. But it's going to be interesting for the next couple groups of people.
And I think the biggest problem there is that you've got a situation where there's like we treat technology, we call it technology because it was invented in our lifetime, but the reality is that younger generation is just stuff, right? They're not scared of it, and I think, you get a lot of people say to you, oh, I don't handle technology, can't do it, don't understand. I was thinking, well, that's really just kind of a cop out to a degree. If you really wanted to know, you would. Doesn't mean you have to be great at it, but I think at the end of the day, I think one of the wise employee used to have sales guys to say, he said, only dead people can't. And I think, at the end of the day, you can do it, and you see that older generation, and I think that older generation has the time to learn that stuff, as opposed to people who've got a job and like an older person. Like my father-in-law, he was, he didn't really know much about computers, but he was in his 80s, and he did spend a lot of time on it because he had time.
Yeah.
Right?
Well, and the willingness. If you're unwilling, it doesn't matter how much time you have, which applies whether you're 20 or 80.
Yeah, exactly.
You could be 20 and unwilling. You could be 80 and willing, and the same with any entrepreneur. The stubborn ones are the ones that die because they're not willing to change. Example I use in planning is, Blockbuster and Netflix were in the same business. Blockbuster was resistant to technology. Netflix was not. Well, you know what happens. So the future is for those who created. I'm sure that's a quote by somebody that wasn't me. We'll see what happens. I am contemplating TikTok for my business because the algorithm is so good. I don't have to like it, but as a tool, I'm like, damn, I'm going to get, I could get in front of hundreds of millions of people, real easy. They're right there. Yeah.
And I mean, that's the challenge. At the end of the day, I think you've got to look at this sort of stuff as a tool, not don't fall in love with it, because you could end up, getting really stuffed up because you're starting to, you're thinking about the good stuff, and you look at, hey, that's a great tool for communication. It's actually interesting with Blockbuster and Netflix. Apparently, Blockbuster in the 11th hour, when Netflix they just about finished Netflix off, Blockbuster decided to go back into retail and shut down their website and focus back on retail in the death. They almost finished Netflix off. Netflix was just about out the back door, and then at the last minute they put on a new CEO that switched back to retail. He thought that was the future, and that's what turned the tables on Netflix, so they can actually get back on track. So
famous last words.
Yeah, and so I think because the guy was in retail and that's what he knew, so that's what he stuck with. So I think So I really appreciate your time. I think we could probably talk hours on strategy and ideas, but I think to me the lesson here is that you've got to be open for opportunity and look around, and then kind of figure out a way that you could take part of that in a more strategic way. And I think the more thinking time you spend on stuff is better for you than anything in small business. I think that's the biggest commodity that people think is, I don't have time, but it's time well spent.
One of the things, just as we finish up, thank you, by the way, it's been awesome chatting, and talking about the method, and where I'd invite your listeners to look is the outcome. Don't get stuck on the how. This CEO's hubris was retail because that's what he knew. And maybe that was, maybe he could have been right saying, hey, the how is we want to become a big retail chain. Well, that was just not a good bet. And that was the choice they made. But don't get stuck on the method and focus on the outcome. If you're outcome focused, you'll have better results. You'll be more creative in your problem solving because you're not going to get stuck in the mud. You're going to look up and say, hey, there's a million ways on how I can do this. What is the what? Why am I doing it in the first place?
I think that's very important. Yeah. So, if someone wants to get hold of you, I think you're SME, SMEstrategy.net.
Yeah, SMEstrategy.net, Anthony C. Taylor on most of the internet. LinkedIn is my preferred way to stay connected for professionals out there. And then we have our own podcast, the Strategy and Leadership Podcast. Different than yours, actually. I really like yours, John. Well, not just because I'm a guest and I'm a host on the other one, because it's
easy being a guest sometimes because you don't have to worry about all the tech stuff.
Oh yeah, we're in it. But no, it's been honestly really a blast. But yeah, happy to connect with any of your listeners. We've got tons of free downloads online, and we talk about strategy and leadership as well. So cool. Yeah, connect, say what's up.
We'll put all those links up there for any listeners who want to come to the website and have a look. So we also have a video version and audio version, so it's really cool. So thanks so much for your time, Anthony, and maybe we'll talk to you again in 10 years to work out what happened with your plan.
I better get going if I'm going to be held accountable.
Pressure's on.
I look forward to it, John. Absolutely. Thanks so much for having me.
That's a wrap on another awesome episode for the Startup Secret Show for entrepreneurs. Just before you go, if you like this episode, we'd be very grateful for a 5-star review. Please also consider recommending the show to a friend or two. Make sure you subscribe for future episodes at startupsecrets.show right now. Until next time, if you're an entrepreneur, make a start on your next great business idea today.